goes first, me or you, Arco? I guess,
Why don't you go first? Because it's your proposition. You made the claim.
yeah. I don't have my normal long speech. Um, so I'll just go over sort of the basic points and we can kind of talk about it. I'm not taking this too seriously. So, again, the proposition is basically that romantic outings, also known as dates, are instrumental goods. So my thought about this is that you never really go on a date for the date itself, but rather for some other ulterior motive, whether that be like the sex that comes after the date, which was my original thought about it, or so we can talk a little bit about that. So I think that dates are just a human form of like mating ritual and that they're only like instrumental for that mating ritual. So it's not the mating ritual itself that you're looking for, it's like the copulation, right? And like, all the stuff that comes around that, and then that's the good that you're actually trying to achieve by going on a date, right? So that's the first argument, and then the second argument would be something like the ultimate goal is like the relationship of either friend or lover that you're trying to foster by going on the dates, and the date itself is what helps you build that up. And so the date is like an instrumental good in the sense that you're not just trying to go out on dates, but you're trying to like build that relationship, and then that's what helps you build that relationship is going on that. It's not the thing in itself that you're looking for. Otherwise you could just do that alone or just do that with your friends, but that the fact that it's like a romantic outing points to something secondary. And so that's basically where I'm coming at from the topic. Um, I think that like basically you have to prove if you're on Arco's side, the burden of basically you have to prove that you're going on the romantic outing itself and that you're only doing it for that and for its own sake. And I'm just not sure how that's possible. So he's gonna have to prove that. And so if you don't think that that's possible, then my side should theoretically win. And we can go into examples about instrumental goods if people have questions about that.
Well, I'd first like to start by saying I don't agree with that being the standard for what I need to prove. I think the standard that needs to be proven is that dating is only an instrumental good, not an intrinsic good and an instrumental good. Because it is my view that you can have an intrinsic good and instrumental good. They're not exclusive. So I just want to be clear what I mean by an intrinsic good and what I mean by an instrumental good. I think CoolDog probably has a similar meaning. I take an intrinsic good to be something that we view as good in and of itself, and I take an instrumental good to be something that is good for some other good. So a great example of this would be paying my taxes is an instrumental good. I fucking hate paying my taxes, but I like the benefits that come from it, like the roads that are there, the security, the subsidies for the water I have, all of those things. I like those things, and I think it's good for society. So it's good for those things, but the act itself is only an instrumental good because I despise all the other things there. So I just want to point out that the standard that I have to show that dates are only good in and of themselves, I don't think is the standard we need to use here. The standard we need to use here is that we have to show dating is only an instrumental good, not both instrumental and intrinsic. So that's what I think the standard should be here. And I don't think that dates are merely instrumental. When we talk about something being an instrument, we could talk about it having a type of function. Like we would say a knife is good for cutting because it is good for the person who wants to cut. Or we could say a car is good for getting someone from A to B because that's the point of it being there. It's an instrument for those things. But whenever we say a date is good, we don't come home and say, oh, the date was good. The date was good for fucking, or the date was good for relationship building. We talk about it in this way. We say the date was good because the experience in and of itself was enjoyable. And I think that there alone, that content alone, is how we view dating. And that, I think, argues my point that dating is an intrinsic good. It can be an instrument for fucking or for relationship building, but going on a date in and of itself is a pleasurable experience. And because of that, I think dating is not exclusively an instrumental good, but also an intrinsic good.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think that this is the road you have to take. I mean, I agree with your criterion of standard that the only part there is doing the heavy lifting, and I mean, I guess agree with that standard. But I mean, I'm just like kind of curious. So does your view imply that every instrumental good is also a good in itself? Because that seems to be what you're implying, right? Because you get
No,
pleasure from any type of instrumental good that you have. So
I
the
don't
2 are
agree. I
synonymous?
don't think I don't think that every pleasure, every instrumental good is an intrinsic good. Like I talked about um, the taxes example. I would consider that only an instrumental good.
But aren't you happy when you get the benefits that your taxes pays for? Like,
I'm
so you
happy when those goods
happy
occur, yeah, but that's
so
because the taxes are an instrument for getting those goods to occur.
I just think that, like, that your view implies that you should be happy in paying your taxes. Like, why I think you're
I don't think
unhappy
it.
with the
I don't
misalignment.
think. I don't think it implies I have to be happy when I'm paying my taxes. So the way I'm sort of looking at happy here is it's a very subjective thing. I know I am not happy when I pay my taxes. There's no pleasure there when I do it. I see nothing good about it in the experience of doing it. However, the consequences are things that deem as good.
So
And that's
any
what I mean by that's
okay,
what I mean
okay,
by it being intrinsic.
sure.
Like in
So
and
for
of
you
itself, paying taxes is
yeah,
not good.
I'm just asking this question to probe where the line is. So, like, a
Right.
purely instrumental good is one that you get no pleasure from achieving, but it gives you something good later. So, like the taxes example.
Yeah.
But any instrumental good that also comes with pleasure along with it is also a good in and of itself, under your view, right?
Yeah, if I find something intrinsically good about it, that would be intrinsically good.
Yeah, this just seems like kind of a weird view, right? This just seems like kind of a weird view because like it doesn't really seem to, deal with like the actual nature of what these types of goods are, right? So like for example, and like different goods can be different goods for different people. Like I'm not gonna argue that, but like I was thinking of like an example of like an alcoholic, for example. Right? An
Yeah.
alcoholic drinking isn't a good in itself, right? It's the state of being drunken that is like the end in itself that they're trying to achieve. So like drinking the beer is an instrumental good in the sense that it's getting you to the drunkenness, right? But the drinking of a beer or liquor itself is not the good in itself that they're pursuing, right? It's an
I would
instrument.
say I would say that's accurate if they had no preference for what they were drinking. If the goal was just to get drunk, but they didn't care about drinking the beer in and of itself
Well,
to
you
get
can
drunk.
have preferences about
So
your
like for so someone who loves a particular IPA, like say they love Pliny the Elder, it's their favorite beer. They also enjoy getting drunk. But Pliny the Elder, just consuming that by itself gives them pleasure. That would be a type of intrinsic good.
so is
But
there
if they have no if they have no preference about what type of alcohol they want to drink, then I'm fine not necessarily calling drinking an intrinsic good.
Yeah, you see, like, here we just disagree, right? Because, like, I think that, like, when you're drinking that specific IPA for the taste of it, then yes, drinking it is the good in itself from the pleasure that
Yeah.
you're getting, and it doesn't matter if there's alcoholic content in it or not, right? That's what makes it a good in itself, right? But, like, when you're an alcoholic, you can certainly have, like, preferences over what you're drinking for efficiency reasons, like, that's how we measure the difference between instruments, right? In your knife example, there's like good knives, there's better knives, and there's worse knives, right? We can have preferences
Right.
about what we're doing that's not necessarily tied to the pleasure, and it still be considered an instrumental good. The alcoholic prefers 100 proof vodka over 40 proof vodka because it's more efficient at what they're trying to do,
But
right?
they're preferring the reason why they prefer the vodka is because of the efficiency to being an instrument to something else. So it's
Correct.
like preferring the sharp knife because it's good at cutting.
Right.
That's sort of
Exactly.
the symmetry breaker.
And so,
But
like,
for the alcoholic, that's more discerning, where he prefers the sharp knife that looks a particular way and the way it feels when he does that. Then I would say that the alcoholic would have a type of intrinsic good there. I would say that it would be ultimately bad for him because of the negative consequences of being an alcoholic, the health consequences. But that doesn't then negate the idea that there would be no intrinsic goods. It seems to me
no,
that
no, but
sort of
like, you're gonna see where I'm going because we need to pivot back to like the actual prop here to get to see where I'm going with it, right? So, like, when you're making the evaluative judgment that a date is good, right? I think what you're really saying is you're marking out that action, that event's ability to produce the other ends that you're looking for, right? And I think like when you specifically call it when you call a date good in itself, what you're really noting is the bonding, bonding between two people, and that's what you're noting as the good date, right? And I mean, like you can take examples like you can have a good date anywhere as long as the people there are having a good time, right? And this points
Yeah,
towards the fact that you can have a bad date at the exact same restaurant that you have a good date at, correct? And
you
that's
can.
because of the bonding and the exterior good that these things are instruments for.
But the bonding, so I don't think that the bond, so there are two ways we can talk about bonding. We can talk about the bond that occurs in the date, where both people feel connected to each other because of how they're sharing and finding things in common, enjoying the sensual experience of
And
eating great food or drinking a fine
right,
wine.
and
And
that's
then
not
there's another, let me finish this thought.
okay, gotcha.
And then there's another type of bonding, which is this extended long-term type of bonding, where you go on another date, and you have a commitment to each other. So there are two types of bonding still. So we can talk about bonding being located in the date itself being good, and that's where I think the intrinsic good is. And there can be an instrumental bonding and an instrumental good to the date as well. But if let's take a hypothetical here, imagine you went on a date with someone, you have no other dates with them after this date, you
Sure.
aren't going to have sex with them. You just have a date where you enjoy the time with it. There's no other external consequences that you would point to as being good. The date by itself was just an enjoyable experience. And you look back on that date in the future about how enjoyable that date was. The date doesn't become a bad date because it failed to be an instrument towards these other things. It was an enjoyable experience by itself. And I
Yeah,
think that's intuitive to many people.
see where I think that you're probably my opponent is sadly confused, right? Terribly confused, right? Is the fact that okay, here's the correct counterexample to prove my side. We're gonna go to a date and we're gonna make every factor equal, right? You're gonna order the same dish. We're gonna use the restaurant example, but you could do it with anything. You order the same dish, you order the same wine, etc., etc. Now, why is in one case the date considered good, and the other case the date considered bad? Well, these are the secondary factors that the date is actually supposed to facilitate, right? This is the bonding and things like that, right? It's not the date in itself that is the intrinsic good because you could get the same intrinsic good from doing the same actions of the date by yourself or in a non-romantic context, right? And that's why the date, it's the romantic outing, emphasis on the romantic outing part is instrumental, right? Because you're looking for these secondary characteristics. So when you're in your hypothetical, right? I would say that the date itself, the going to the restaurant, the eating, etc., is an instrumental for these higher tier or separated types of goods that actually is what's making you that's spawning this evaluative judgment, right? It's not the action or the events itself, but it's the secondary things. Does that make sense?
Yes, but I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that bifurcation between the secondary things and the date because I think the date itself is part of that. Those things aren't separable.
I think that you're just forcing anything that happens within a this temporal time period must be necessarily the same thing all the way up and down. And I
Well,
think
that's what I take the word date to mean.
so like yeah, I think we disagree about that because like when I cut a fruit with my knife, right? In the act of cutting, right? It isn't the knife or the cutting itself that's the good that I'm achieving, right? It's the actual separation of two parts, right? Those are two things that happen at the same time. The cutting is the instrument for the separation there. And so you can have
Right.
something within the same temporal window
But
with two different tiers.
that's presupposing that the cutting is an instrumental good. If you look at it in a different way, that you enjoy the experience of cutting this object, enjoy the experience of using the knife itself, it becomes an intrinsic good. So what the difference there is not the action. The difference there is your appraisal of the action that is making it an instrumental good versus an intrinsic good.
So you're going hyper subjectivist about this then.
Yes.
I mean, but then but if you're going hyper subjectivist about this, then I'm just going to deny that there's any instrumental goods whatsoever. Right? It's all goods in
Then
themselves.
you're if you're going to deny, I think if you're going to make the claim that something is only an instrumental good, but that is true of all goods, other than like the final good, that being happiness or pleasure or well-being, if you're going to make that claim, then your proposition is trivially true.
Yeah, but do
It's
you
not a
believe?
meaningful state. I think to make that claim, we have to presuppose that there are intrinsic goods in the world.
Well, yeah, I do agree that there are intrinsic goods. Do you believe that there are intrinsic goods?
Yes. So
Okay,
I
what
just
are
think
those
this I
intrinsic
just
goods?
want to point out to the audience here that this tactic of trying to backpedal, I think refutes his own proposition.
Yeah, if there are no intrinsic goods, then I lose, but I'm trying to understand what your view is.
Yeah, my view is that it's the belief of the person and their relationship to the event that would make it intrinsic versus instrumental. So someone could have intrinsic good to doing taxes. Like I can imagine someone who loves working with numbers, who really enjoys being an accountant, and they take great pride in their work. So the action of doing the taxes itself could be an intrinsic good to that person. But for
Do you
me, it
okay,
is not an intrinsic good.
do you consider pleasure to be an intrinsic good?
Yeah,
Pleasure is an intrinsic good.
that's right.
Oh, then I win because you're doing these actions to achieve the intrinsic good of pleasure. So every action is instrumentally good for getting that intrinsic good of pleasure. I win.
But it doesn't make you win because we went over this in the beginning. That's only wins if we presuppose exclusion between intrinsic and instrumental. But I don't hold that view. My view is that you can have an intrinsic good that is also an instrumental good, because the proposition is only an instrumental good.
So how can
So I
something
think you
be
need to make the
good?
argument that there
How
can
can
only be.
Yeah, I just don't understand how there can be as something that is both intrinsically good and an instrument for something else when pleasure, presumably, right, is what you're getting out of the date, I assume. Else it's one of
Mhm.
these secondary qualities, right? And that's the intrinsic good,
Yeah.
right? The date is only there to foster that intrinsic good of pleasure.
Let me put it to
I
you
don't
like this.
see how
So
it can both be instrumental and intrinsic. Like, you're getting the pleasure from doing the actions. The doing the actions is you don't get pleasure in itself from doing the actions. That's,
but
like, secondary.
that's going back on the refutation of your proposition, which is if all of those things that bring you pleasure are just instrumental goods, then you self-refute here.
No,
So
I
you
don't.
have to have some actions that lead to being intrinsic goods.
No, all I have
So the
to do is
only
the
difference
thing
here,
itself.
so I just sorry, I'd like to finish this if that's
Okay,
okay.
go ahead.
Um, the difference here is it is possible, on my view, for me to enjoy the act of cutting the apple, of using the knife, getting great pleasure out of that experience, that sensual experience. That can be intrinsically good to me, and I enjoy the how well the knife cut, what it was cut, and then I eat the thing that it cut. It's an instrument for that other good that happens afterwards. So their good is indexed in different places. There's the good of the action, there's the good of the consequence, and both of those things can be good to me. What makes
Yeah,
something merely instrumental is whenever the first part, the action, lacks the good,
yeah,
and
but
there's only the consequential good.
you're conjoining two things that have no business being conjoined because like the actual bare act of cutting itself is the instrument to getting the pleasure, which is the good in itself, of the experience of cutting, right? Those
Only
two
if you
are separate.
believe it to be so. The beliefs are important here because an individual could have a belief that the cutting itself is an enjoyable experience.
Yeah,
So
right, that's
I
fine.
don't think that
That's fine
I
for
don't
my
think
view.
intrinsic goods have to be universally intrinsic goods. I
That's
think they're
that's fine for my view. I'm compatible with that. The act of cutting is a good in itself. I'm fine with that. But the only thing I need to prove is that the cutting itself is an instrument, right? The cutting itself is an instrument for that phenomenal experience, which is pleasurable. Like
but
the
you
bare
haven't
action
shown.
itself is not a good. It's just
No,
bare act.
you've just claimed that you just claimed that I can't combine intrinsic goods and instrumental
Yeah, you
goods.
can't.
But there's not an argument there. Just saying you can't is not an argument for why I can't.
But why should I basically just say bare actions have this property of being good when not located in the phenomenal experience, which is your subjectivism should lead us to, right? It's
It
the
doesn't have
experience
to.
of cutting that's the good,
I'm
not the
not
cutting
saying
itself.
I'm not saying it necessarily is intrinsically good in all cases. I'm saying if someone has that experience, then it is an intrinsic good for
Yeah,
that
yeah.
person.
Yeah, so why are we locating it in the intrinsic good in the movement of the arm and not the experience of the person who's cutting? Why are we
No,
locating
no, I think the
in the
movement of
cut
the arm
itself?
is the experience of the person cutting. I don't see why you're bifurcating that again.
Because action and experience are different. Like, the movement and experience are different. Cutting is a movement. It's a
Yeah,
physical
but the
movement.
experience of cutting, I don't see how you would separate those things because all actions have an experience with them. I don't think that those
That's
things
not
I
true.
don't I don't think that there's a type of dualism with action and experience. I think actions are experience.
There are
I
definitely so if a tree falls in a forest and no one's there to hear it, it never fell.
But
And
that's not an action in this case because action, we're talking about a subject doing something. We're not talking about
you
events
can
in the
sleep
external world.
without
That's
having
not relevant to the question.
here's another example of an action happening without experience, sleepwalking, right? You
Yeah,
don't
I
have
would
an
just
experience
consider
and
but
you
I wouldn't
sleepwalk,
cons
and you have action and experience are separated quite clearly.
right, but that doesn't then show that when someone is aware that the action and experience are separate.
Yeah, you
It
see,
just
it's the
shows a case
awareness.
it just shows a case that it can be separate,
See,
like a
it's the
bodily
awareness.
reflex.
Yeah, you see, but the fact that there's a you should I mean, the fact that I can show counters example to action and experience should point to the fact, right, that it's the
But
awareness
look,
itself.
when I say
The
action
awareness
here, I'm not when I say action here, I'm talking about something like a volitional action. I'm not
sure.
talking about a reflex. So if someone hits my knee and my leg like whacks, that wouldn't be an action on my view because action is something that requires agency here.
Yeah, but it's the awareness of the cuttingness of the action that's giving you pleasure, not the cutting itself. It's the awareness of it, that's the point.
But I think that's a very
It's the
externalist view here.
awareness
And I don't think that
of the bonding, and it's the awareness of the growth of love to be
your view then is that awareness itself is the only intrinsic good, and all those
no,
other things are just
I'm not
and this just
committed to
goes
that.
back to the self-refuting claim that you
I'm
made
not
earlier.
committed to that.
Oh,
All I'm
okay.
saying is that, like, your intrinsic goods within the date, right, is not the date itself, but it's, like, your phenomenal experience surrounding the bare actions, which
The
are
day
instruments to give you this phenomenal experience, which is pleasurable and all the goods that you
I
can
don't I don't hold to this type of dualism here between, like, this external world and the experience. It is my experience. That is the date. Those things we can talk about it in this abstract sense of it being separate, but that abstract sense does not then refute suddenly this notion that I'm holding where they are one and the same. Because
but
if you weren't there to experience it and enjoy those pleasures, it would not be a date for you at all. It
so
would be a date for another person.
here's an example. Little Xan takes a bunch of bars and gets barred the hell out, right? And he goes on a date, which he often does, right? He doesn't have conscious memory of it, and he's doing the actions of the date. He still went on the date without experience,
But I
right?
don't consider
He
when
still did
he's
the
under
trivial actions of the date. His girlfriend, who somehow tolerates this, right, says that they went on a date together. They went on a date together. The bare actions is the date itself.
look, as I mentioned earlier, action here has to do something with volitional movement. So what the voluntary action that Zan had was taking the bars. Once he took the bars and became inebriated and lost control, he was not party to that date anymore. So the GF
So
could talk
Little
about the
Xan
date.
is
Let me
both
finish,
on
please.
a date and
Let me
not
finish, please.
on a
Let
date
me
at the
finish, please. Let me finish, please. The GF on the date, however, can talk about the date being good because they were there.
so Little Xan both is and is not at the date at the same time under your view.
I wouldn't
From
consider
the
someone who's
girlfriend's
I don't
perspective,
consider someone who is, like, passed out drunk present on the date, no.
but you see, like, but from the girlfriend's perspective, this is Lil Xan, right? That's just who he is. That's how he is. She was on a date with him in his barred out state. They had a
So,
date
I
planned
mean,
from her perspective.
in the same way that, like, if little Xan was in a coma, she could go and say, like, "Oh, well, this is little Xan, and I'm here and experiencing this with little Xan." But there's no little Xan there to respond back. He's in a coma. Just because there is this physical body there, that doesn't mean Xan is present or having actions at all.
don't like your view because it's like you're restricting action to only be conscious volitional action, which I just think is wrong. Like I don't
I
see why
yeah.
we can call sleepwalking an action. Like that person was sleepwalking and then they wake up and they're like, "Oh shit, I was sleepwalking." Like that's not the common sense view of action at all. Like you
Right, but
have
I
to
don't have to use the common sense view here.
yeah,
I can
no, but
use
like
I can use the view of philosophers like Helen Stewart, who was
well,
talking about action in this way, and we can talk about action in the analytics school because this is a very common way to talk
but
about action.
you're saying that the sleepwalker when they wake up wasn't walking.
I would say their body was walking, but the person who has an awareness or who would be acting, who would be settling the matter, settled nothing there. There
I
would
mean,
be no action.
if you think that you can act without having a conscious experience, or if you buy the little Xan data experience, then I win. Like, reject this silly view that you have to be fully consciously present and you can't be drunk and do actions. I mean, like, yeah, just reject that view for absurdity. I think that that's a reductio of your position.
I don't think
I,
you can reduct it. I don't think it's something that's rejected because of reductio, because the definition is clear of how I'm using it. And all that CoolDog is saying is that he doesn't accept the definition, and he's
yeah.
doing this appeal to emotion here. But that's not an argument for why the definition is
Okay.
false. It's
So
also, let me finish. It's also not an argument for why intrinsic goods and instrumental goods cannot be uh, occurring at the same time. He has failed to make an argument there. He's going
no,
to this
you're
appeal. He's
linking
going to this appeal to absurdity about
it,
this action here, but he hasn't made an argument for
based
why
upon
intrinsic goods and instrumental goods can't be combined.
It's based upon your claim that the phenomenal experience of pleasure, which you've ceded, is the intrinsic good part of all of your instrumental goods that are both
No,
extremely thing.
I agreed. I didn't concede anything. I agreed
Yeah,
that pleasure is an intrinsic good. I did not say that only pleasure is an intrinsic good.
but
That is where you made a mistake.
any of the intrinsic goods that you're going to claim about a date are all going to be within the mental phenomenal realm. They're not going to be about the actual act of eating itself.
Right. On my view, everything is in the mental phenomenal realm.
Right,
So
because drunk
it's not
drivers
a
aren't
meaningful
liable
statement
for
to
their
point out.
actions. Okay. So, guy goes to a bar, right?
Yeah.
It's shit-faced drunk, right? He's
Mhm.
shit-faced drunk at the bar. Before he got drunk, he intended to call a cab, but didn't do that, and he got shit-faced drunk. That was his intention, right? He's no longer blamable for drunk driving because he's not consciously there. It wasn't really him.
No,
It was just
no,
his body driving.
let me explain how he's blamable. He is absolutely blamable because he has the knowledge that getting drunk will make him impaired, and he has the knowledge that driving impaired is dangerous and will cause deaths. So
No,
let me finish. When he gets drunk and does the driving, he had knowledge that would occur. He chose to do it anyways, so he's still
no, he
responsible.
doesn't have knowledge while he's drunk because he's passed out fucking drunk. He doesn't have any knowledge at that
It
point.
doesn't matter. The knowledge doesn't have to be there when he's drunk. He has knowledge before getting drunk that
Okay,
will
okay.
happen. And
Let's
because he has let me finish. Because he has the knowledge beforehand, he has a responsibility not to do it.
let's complicate the example. Drunk guy has done this for years, and every single time beforehand, he's called a fucking cab, right? So he knows that he's gonna call a fucking cab because he's quote a responsible drunk, right? He knows this about himself, and this is the one time that he doesn't fucking do it, right? He's not responsible for that under your view. He knows that he's gonna call a cab before he gets drunk.
No, he
It
is.
happens,
He
and he doesn't
is.
end up calling the cab.
He is responsible under my view still.
No, he's not because he's
Because
not
he didn't
there.
take sufficient precautions. He did not take sufficient precautions to prevent himself from driving drunk.
No, he's not volitionally acting.
In the moment he's drunk, but he was volitionally acting beforehand. And because he did not take sufficient precautions to prevent himself from driving drunk, he's still responsible.
Right, sure, but, like, the fact is that you're separating out what the body does from, right, yourself. When the body like, a sleepwalker is no longer responsible for if I take an Ambien before I go to sleep and I end up driving my car down the road, I'm not responsible, right?
We have that view of people. We do have that view. People who are under a drug like that and have this experience that are out of body in a court of law, we look at that differently than someone who had full awareness. We do have the view that the responsibility is different when someone is inebriated.
Yeah,
So
but
it's not
why?
you're not pointing out something meaningful here.
Yeah, but why? Why is the drunk driver case any different than the Ambien case? Both knowingly knew that they would be incapacitated and couldn't drive.
Not for the so if the person taking Ambien knowingly knew, then they would have a responsibility. But with the Ambien case, I was just taking it for granted that many people did not know that was the case because that's what happened when Ambien came out. They did not know the drug would have this effect, and then they did those bad things. And now that we have the knowledge, the responsibility changes. There's an epistemic issue there. But
But you
again,
said in the court
again,
of
this
law, we view them differently. You said in the court of law, we view them differently, so we don't.
right. No, I was referring to these types of cases where we didn't have knowledge. You were
Okay.
presupposing that we had the knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, but so, like, if someone takes Ambien in their home and they end up
Yeah.
killing someone on the road, are they responsible under your
In the
view?
same way the drunk driver is responsible, yes. If they have the knowledge that they
Okay,
would get inebriated, they would have responsibility in the same way. But this doesn't this so
okay,
this like this sort of
that's strange.
this
Prove all
derail
things.
hasn't shown that we can't have intrinsic goods and instrumental goods. So if you hold the position in the audience that you can have an intrinsic good that is also an instrumental good, then I think you should vote for my side of the
You have
proposition.
their action, and then you have the evaluation of it and the phenomenal experience. That's how things work. That's my view. I think that that's a simple view that explains the drunk driving case because your body is always responsible for its actions under my view. Like the drunk driving case and Ambien case aren't a challenge for my view, but you're having trouble saying that you're having
So,
trouble
okay,
with
you said you made the claim the body is always responsible for what happens. So I have a
I
hypothetical
mean,
for
what
you. I
I
have a
mean, what
hypothetical for you.
already
Now let's
told
imagine,
me.
let me go through this hypothetical because I've gone through several of yours. Imagine that we have a demon controlling your body and the demon has totally shut your consciousness off completely. You have no awareness of what your body is doing. However, in the external world, your body is murdering people mercilessly and torturing them. Like the most insane torture you can talk about because you said that your body is always responsible for the actions that
Yeah.
happen. Would you be blameworthy for what the demon did with your body?
Okay, so you would have to say that you were not murdering people.
Answer the question.
The answer is that you are murdering people. That's my answer.
Are you blameworthy? You're blameworthy for something a demon did with your body.
You're murdering people. That's all I need. I don't need to talk about
Are
blame.
you blameworthy? That's the
I don't need
question.
to
You
answer
have to
that.
answer the question. Are you blameworthy
Okay,
for a
I will
demon using
say
your body
okay,
to murder
okay,
someone?
okay. I will answer with a yes or no if you answer a follow-up for me, okay?
Sure.
Okay, so my answer is yes, but now you have to answer the follow-up, okay? Was that person murdering people?
I don't think the person was murdering people. I think the
Was that
demon
person
was.
killing people?
I think the demon was killing people.
Was that person killing people?
I think I'm answering
Was
no,
the
the
body
demon's
killing
killing
people?
people.
Was the
The
body killing
body,
people?
yeah, the body was killing people, but
Okay,
I don't hold the view that the body is to blame for what's
okay,
happening here. I hold the
so
view that the person acting with the body is
okay,
to blame. Now,
so
I just
then
want to point out to the audience here
Marco,
before we continue, if I
Marco,
may.
no, I wanna finish my point for why I asked that, if that's okay. I wanna finish the
Sure,
point
yeah,
for
that's
why
fine.
I asked
Yeah.
that. So the thing is, the body is doing an action, which is killing people, slashing them up, whatever, right? And that's separate from the experience, right? So the bare experience of going on a date is the instrumental good that is giving you the pleasure of that or lack thereof if you're unconscious. So there is a separation between action and then phenomenal experience. That's what I'm trying to win. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so I don't agree that there's a separation between action and the person doing it because the action was the demon, not the body. The demon was acting. So the phenomenal experience
You
of the
just
demon
said
doing
the
it,
body is slashing. There is an action happening there.
so I've already explained my view of action earlier. You're just conflating on what I mean by action here. You
Yeah,
are holding a different view of action, which is
yeah,
fine.
exactly.
But you need to say on my view of action, it is this. But to say I am saying that is false because I've explained what action is and I've made it clear that the demon would be the one acting, not the body.
I mean, for me to win, all I need to say is that actions can happen. where the conscious experience isn't
I
happening.
don't agree. I don't agree for you to
And then
win.
the
For you
date
to
the
win, let me
date
remind people of the standard. For you to win, you need to demonstrate that dating is only an instrumental good
right,
and there is no intrinsic good to
and I'm
dating. And
saying the
I want to
act
go back. I
the
want to go
bare
back to
act of eating food on the date at the restaurant is not an intrinsic good, it's your pleasurable sensations that come from that, which is separated from the bare act itself, the bare physical shit that's happening. That's separate, that's the instrumental good part, and then we have the intrinsic good part, which is the shit that Arco wants to align with that.
right. I just so one, I don't hold the same view of action CoolDog does. So I want to put that in there. I also want to point out that CoolDog thinks that if a demon were controlling his body and murdered things, that he was the one acting and would be blameworthy. If you think that that's a ridiculous view, then I think you should vote for my side of the proposition
Anybody in a court of law would say to that excuse that you murdered people.
because they don't believe the demon did it, because
Right,
they don't
nobody
believe demons are
talks about
possible.
demons.
In the hypothetical, the demon is possible and the
Yeah, but
demon
your
did it.
hypothetical is shit because it's always false.
The
The
hypothetical doesn't
hypotheticals aren't always false. None are grounded in
the
reality.
hypothetical doesn't turn out in the real world, but what it does do is
Yeah,
it demonstrates your standard of how you're determining action and blame,
yeah,
and I
because I
don't
only
think that that
care about the
standard
real
is
world. I only care about real dates, real ambient, real alcoholics. I don't give a shit about your fucking
right. And
fantasy.
what I'm saying is the reality is that the action is not separate, that the action body separation here is not true.
So for your view to work, you need supernatural fucking entities that don't exist. That's how
No,
your
for your view to work, you need some sort of dualism between the external world and the internal world. And I'm saying they're
I
unified.
don't need dualism. All I'm saying is that there are like physical shit that happens that brings forth pleasure, and the physical shit
Right.
itself is not good in itself. It's just the
Right,
instrument
right.
towards
So
the
I'm not
good.
refuting that physical stuff happens here. What I'm saying is what an action is something that has to do with a subject settling matters. That's what
Yeah,
I
but
mean by action. Now,
doing the physical shit, right? That's instrumental good for the goods in themselves. The
let me
date
put it
is
to you
the
this way.
physical shit. The goods
Let
in themselves are the phenomenal shit.
let me put it to you this way. If something were an instrumental good, if something were an instrumental good, then if we could get that good it's an instrument for, we would have no need for the instrumental good. Do you agree?
What? Pardon? Repeat? Sorry, I missed that.
If something were an instrumental good and
Yeah.
it were possible to get the good without the instrument to get the good,
Yeah.
then do you think that we should just have the good and we can get rid of the instrumental good?
So if it's just possible to have the good,
Yeah,
do we need to have
without
the mental good?
like if you could have a six pack without working out, would you want the six pack?
Well, yeah.
Right. So if you can have all of these things,
Yeah, these are the asexuals and the rapists. If you want to go with the fucking for the rapists and then the companionship, that's the asexual.
I don't consider rape to be fucking.
Well, I mean, this is semantics, like sexual pleasure.
I mean, I wouldn't consider it sexual pleasure either.
Well, for the rapist, it is.
I don't agree. I think for the rapist, it has to do
Oh,
with more
come
about. I
on.
think it has to do about like way more about control and domination.
Come on.
Yeah, I don't hold the view that it's I don't hold the view that it's some kind of kink gone wrong. I hold the
Well,
view that it's some type of like
they're both.
domination or control. But it doesn't matter to the proposition here.
Yeah, but like that's the point.
No, if the point is it doesn't matter to the proposition, I don't know why you brought it up.
Yeah, yeah, Dorfail, the rapist get pleasure. So like, yeah, that's the instrument for the date is that sexual pleasure. So like, if you could remove the dating without causing excessive harm, you would just like fuck things indiscriminately. Like that's the point.
If dating were this instrumental good for sex or relationships,
Yeah.
then why don't we see far more people paying for sex? Because if it's just an instrument, and if you had tons of money, you could just pay for it rather than going through the instrument. But we see this massive amount of people dedicating tons amount of time and energy and resources to the experience of the date itself. They go to enjoy the company, they enjoy the restaurant, all of those things. I don't think that this
Yeah,
separation
but you're
between
missing the
like
romantic part, right? You're missing the romantic part because you can get all that shit by doing it yourself or doing it with a friend. The
right.
romantic
So
part came
there's a family resemblance there, but the romantic element is just that which qualifies it as a date.
right, but you see, the thing is, in your first hypothetical about the date that it's not going anywhere with, right?
Mhm.
You could get all of those same goods without being in a romantic date, right? Uniquely, the romantic date also implies these longer term things.
Right, but
Right?
the date no, I don't think it
So a
implies longer
date
term
that
things.
ends up
I don't
not
think
going anywhere is a
I
bad
don't
date.
I
It's a
don't agree. I don't agree. I would call a date that didn't go anywhere, but that I enjoyed a good date.
that's wrong. Romantic shit.
Okay, so now CoolDog is saying my belief about my experiences is wrong.
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
100%.
All right.
Because,
So
like, yeah,
On CoolDog's view, he's allowed to tell other people about their experience of goods are wrong.
and you can tell me that some of my experiences are wrong, but I just think that, like, if the
I'm not
date
saying
ends up going
uh,
anywhere, in retrospect, it wasn't a good date because you would have, like, a wish that you could have, like, spent more time with that person if it was so goddamn good.
no,
Right? Like,
the date doesn't suddenly get revised as a bad date. What becomes bad is that you don't have a relationship there. So
so,
it's some
like,
other good. It's some hold on. It's some other good you're talking about. You're not talking about the date anymore. You're talking about this other good of a long-term relationship
yeah,
lacking.
sure. But it could also be the things that the date conjured up in that moment. Like the act of being with someone else at a restaurant conjures up a phenomenal experience, which is the good
Yeah.
itself. It's not the date itself that is the good, right? It's not the physical act of eating that is the good, but it's the other phenomenal shit that experience with it, which is the good in itself, which is not equivalent to the date, right?
Yeah,
That's
I guess we just fundamentally disagree on that separation. And I
yeah,
don't
I mean
see us
that's
getting
what the vote
past that separation.
that's what the vote is on. Like I don't see like yeah.
No, that's not what the vote is on.
Yeah.
The vote is on dating being merely an instrumental good.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, like, if you
Right.
think the
But
physical
not
shit is not a good
not
in itself, then yeah, I win.
no, because on that view, we went over this earlier. On that view, there would be no such thing as an intrinsic
Yeah, but
good. That
also
would be
I'm
let me
very
finish, please. Let me finish, please.
anti-hybrid
Let me
not
finish, please. Let me finish, please.
okay.
So on the view that no action can be an intrinsic good, your proposition is trivially true because we have to
Hold on.
presuppose that actions can have an intrinsic good. Otherwise, I would have never accepted the debate. And I think that's a very sophistic move to do.
Well, I
To
mean,
be
if
like, oh,
you
it
really
turns out
do
there's no
that
such thing as an intrinsic good in action.
well, then I would win.
By default, no one else could beat that proposition. And
Oh, no one else can beat
I
that
think that's
proposition,
such a
I
weaselly
can.
view.
Oh,
And I
okay.
pointed out in the
Right.
beginning that if that's the standard you're holding,
I
if you're
feel
and I think it's a very uncharitable standard to hold.
I feel bad that you've given me the win here by, like, not being able to refute that because I would win there. You have to argue that there are goods in themselves too. I guess part of my case is, like, you can argue
I
if you don't
have
believe
pointed
that
out.
there are goods in themselves, and I also win.
No, but you agreed early on that that would self-refute. You already conceded that point. So
Sure.
now to backpedal is another sophist
Dude, I'm
move.
kinda done, dude. I'm kinda done, to be honest. I'm
Fair
kinda
enough.
done. I'm
Fair
kinda
enough.
done. I mean, I think we've said enough. I think this got way more, like, heated than I thought it would. It's meant to be like a bullshit topic.
We can put it to a vote if you like.
I'm good. I'm done. I don't wanna talk about this shit no more.
We can put it to a vote.
Yeah, vote, vote. I'm done.
Well, thank you for the debate, Cool
Dude,
Dog.
that was so much fun, dude. That was such fun. Oh my god. This is why I plan my case beforehand and don't go off the cuff. Like, this is why I do it.
Well, I'm glad you had fun. I also had fun.
It's so much fun, dude. Dude, but your view, like, sleepwalkers aren't walking. That's bullshit. But yeah.
I mean, we could do a proposition on that if you like.
Yeah, that would be more pertinent to what, like, what this debate was actually about.
Right.
This debate was not about dates or romantic relationships at fucking all, which is hilarious.
Well, that's what I thought it would be. It's just a
Yeah,
debate
you
on
said that. You were right.
yeah.
We should have that debate though. I would love to have that debate, and I would actually prep for it.
I need to think about it, honestly.
Yeah, that
But
would be the topic though. Sleepwalker. You would take the position that sleepwalkers aren't walking.
aren't an action. I would say it's not an action.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, something
Yeah,
like that.
we can do a part 2 for that.
Yeah, that would be fun actually, because
Sure.
that's an actually interesting topic as opposed to the
I can put that down as a proposition if
yeah.
you like, and then you can accept it.
Yeah, it would take me a couple days to think about it though, because I don't
Yeah.
really know. Yeah.
So are you guys good on closing statements?
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Okay, for the audience, voting polls and debate chat. As always, base your vote off who you think performed overall better in the debate, who had the better argumentation, who opposed the opposition better. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you both for debating. Good debate.
So, CoolDog, before the
Yeah.
votes come in, if I lose, I will not disagree with the votes.
Okay, that's good. I won't
Yeah,
disagree.
because I thought you did a great job.
I won't disagree with them either. Dude, what a fucking clusterfuck of a debate. Ridiculous. Ridiculous.